the inspiration behind The Last Ninja is a lot of films at that time were based on martial arts. Bruce Lee was massive 12 years before in the 70s, whether it be Enter the Dragon, Big Boss. All of these martial art films had a big impact in the world, and ninjas were very, very popular at that time in culture in the UK. So it became obvious to me as a game designer to try and create something where we could expand upon, which was Bruce Lee. I always loved Bruce Lee on the Atari 400, 800. Thought it was a great game at the time. But I wanted something 3D. And I wanted something that's more of an adventure. And the thing that made Last Ninja very different is if you look at adventure games at the time, whether it's from Melbourne House with The Hobbit, if you look at Rainbow Arts, if you look at even Adventure International, a US company, a lot of these things were text only or text with great graphics. Infocom, another great text adventure company that was building a big following on the Commodore. I was aware of this because with my association with Activision, they actually acquired Infocom. So they got all the Zork series, Leather Goddess of Phobos, and you could see adventure games was a big thing. What if you could have an interactive adventure game with an epic soundtrack, great graphics, but you can move a character? You're not typing text, you're trying to solve puzzles, and you're building it into a ninja theme that was hugely popular at the time. This was the inspiration for me creating the original Last Ninja game design and storyboard, and with the help of some fantastic talents around, be it Bob Stevenson and Hugh Riley with the graphics, obviously John Twiddy in terms of coding and others, Ben Dalglish, Anthony Lee's making epic soundtracks that I helped direct and produce with them, Tim Best, who's extremely supportive of me and was helping make this happen with me, and I can't forget, of course, the brilliant foresight of the Hungarian team at Andromeda Stroke Nova Trade, Soft Source, all of those guys that were working with us that helped make this happen. And without the integrator, which was the core and heart to make this adventure work, this just never would have happened. It would have been like Bruce Lee.
Mark and I met originally when he phoned me up. I was living up in Newcastle in Wallsend, and he phoned me up and said, I've heard you're a great programmer. I've got this game that I want you to come and have a look at, see if you want to work on it. So I sort of said, right, okay, yeah, I'll come down. To be honest, at the time, I hadn't heard of System 3, but I researched them afterwards. And I then came down and met up with Mark. We actually went out for lunch to discuss it and sort of met up with Robert Stein, who obviously was the guy that Mark had been dealing with the original Hungarians. At that point, we then went back and I sort of had a look at the game, saw what they'd got, and really liked the project, or certainly liked the look of it. So sort of that's where it started. We then, I suppose, over the next few weeks, I was working with Elite, and I was doing Ikari Warriors for them, but we had sort of issues whereby the graphics weren't coming through, and it had been going on for months and months and months. So at that point, I decided, well, I might as well actually start doing something on another project whilst waiting for them. So that's when I then came down and I went and moved down to Mark's flat down in Harrow Weald, moved in there for several months, and started writing it sort of at that point.
I think I'd like to add to that is I'd been introduced or recommended to approach John Twiddy via Andy Wright, who worked in the marketing department of Activision in London. We'd already had engaged with a publishing contract with Activision, and they were our global partners for our products worldwide, but it was going nowhere with the Hungarians. It was going to be delayed. They were not going to make the dates, and I was concerned also about the frame rate and the quality of the actual programming itself. The programmers were originally coding the game in Forth. They realized that was too slow, obviously. That's the sort of language you program a washing machine with, not a video game. And they're really, really fantastic, smart guys. They actually wrote their own coding language and started to develop this whole concept around my storyboard of how we can create The Last Ninja. The original concept art was done by Bob Stevenson in an isometric way. There were a number of previews working around. We've got some basic sprites just moving along there through some guys in the UK. But we decided to go to Andromeda because they were a team together, and I felt that they could deliver a strong project based on some of the other projects they're working on that we were seeing. In particular, they had early access to the Atari ST. I've seen some of the work they've done on the ST. They went on to do International Karate, for example, on the ST, which was the best version. But what really impressed me about these guys the most once I did start working with them was their application of how can you make a high-res flip screen work in 64K. And the team come up with a concept which is brilliant called the integrator. The integrator, as I called it, effectively takes high-res imagery, cuts it out and makes screens. But using that same screen, you're not using more memory up. Whereas if you had 16 or whatever 20 high-res screens in memory in 64K, it wouldn't have stuck into memory. That was revolutionary.
In effect, it was just a utility which allowed you to load in high-res screens and cut out sections of those screens and store them in a database. And then you can then layer all of those graphics at any position on a screen. So effectively, Hugh built up the screens by layering the graphics one on top of the other. And obviously, Hugh was very good at actually, using a graphic that was, supposed to be a pole in some places. He'd use it as part of a table on another occasion. So the point being, that allowed him to actually make more interesting backgrounds because of it.
The integrator also allowed our artist that replaced Bob Stevenson, called Hugh Riley, to go in there and to make these fantastic worlds and graphics work, come alive. It was absolutely fantastic. Hugh and I spent many months going backwards and forwards with Tim Best to Budapest to try and work with these guys and to get this finished and done. Really, really amazing guys, but they just didn't seem to be able to get the Commodore to run quick enough or the game to be finished. And so we came to a conclusion with Robert Stein that we would need to find another programmer to actually get the graphics working, get the game actually done, and all of the code that was created was scrapped. Robert Stein is a really important figure in the history of video games. He was the man that discovered Tetris from Russia. Robert also went on to become a partner of mine in later years in life and was a significant part of the backing of System 3 and its success later on. But overall, when we met with John, he was very clear on his message. He couldn't start straight away. We got a call from John and carried on speaking to him over that period of time. And effectively, John started in early 1987, as I recall, John. And what really impressed me with John is he didn't just take what Hugh had created as graphics. He actually even rewrote the integrator, made it far more efficient. It meant we could put more graphics in the game. Hugh came down. I had Hugh in that flat. I had John in the flat. John brought down another friend of his, Mark. Was it Mark Snowball, John?
Yeah.
To do all the edge of road collision detection. And, feverishly, everybody worked day and night effectively to meet the target. We needed to get this game out for July 1987. And very pleased to say that we don't know if we got that. John still got a lot of his master disc, which will probably be coming up on the screen now. You can see are all the discs that John still has got, 5.25-inch floppy. These discs we can't access. Our 1541s don't work anymore. If anyone in the community can help us get access to this data, then we will also include all of this data, which may be graphics, sprites, code, anything and everything we can get access to, we will put on that diamond pack as part of the data on The Last Ninja 4 disc.
The situation was that obviously when I came down, Mark showed me the demo that he'd been given by the Hungarians. Obviously, it consisted of drawing up these wonderful screens using effectively the integrator. The issue was that it was incredibly slow. And whilst it might have seemed like a good system with putting a few blocks on the screen, as soon as you started having lots and lots of blocks, it slowed down and took longer and longer. So some of the screens that Hugh was putting together, they would actually take 30 seconds to actually draw. So obviously, it was fairly obvious that that wasn't really a very practical situation of being able to flip from one screen to the next. I mean, what the Hungarians had done in terms of creating a utility and using high-res screens was really innovative. If it had been put down, if I'd been at the start of the project, I would have said, no way was I going to waste 8K of my 64K on a high-res screen and all the graphics that then have to be cut up to be put on that screen. So they were quite brave to go down that route. Obviously, that's what created the wonderful graphics and allowed Hugh to actually build such varied screens. The issue was it just wasn't quick enough.
I would add into that without this concept that the Hungarians came up with and executed, albeit that it was slow, John, Last Ninja wouldn't have been what it was. It just wouldn't have been the great game it was. So you've got to give a lot of credit to the innovative ideas of how to get over the problem of Bob Stevenson's high-res screens. And I believe that without their foresight and just being away from the games industry and thinking about this as a technical project and a technical problem, it never would have happened, because I don't think I would have, and you would.
I think the issue that is, Mark, that you were sort of sold. Obviously, many of these screens that Bob Stevenson originally created were beautiful high-res screens, each one handcrafted, but those take up sort of 8K a screen, and so you couldn't fit many of those in one load on the C64. So the point is, you couldn't have used them as they were. So hence they had to come up with a system, and obviously the integrator works incredibly well. Obviously, there is the other factor, which is the 3D element. Obviously, what was originally there and created by the Hungarians, obviously A, was a bit slow. But effectively the state of the project when I came on was we could slide a ninja left and right and up and down the screen, and I think you could press a space bar and he would do an animation of a fight, and that was it. So there wasn't anything in terms of, there were no opponents, there were no edge of road, there were no roads, there was no logic to it. So it was obviously fairly. So the suggestion that we used their code as a starting point is a bit of a non-starter. Obviously, my first task was to try and rewrite the integrator and the logic of it and put it into 6502 assembly language, which obviously ended up being, probably 5 or 6 times quicker rather than doing it in a compiled language. We were also able to sort of improve it so that you could flip blocks. So you could sort of use on the left-hand side and the right-hand side of the screen. Also, sort of recolor blocks. And obviously, one of the issues on the 64 was that if you had a block that overlapped slightly with another block, you'd have a conflict of the colors. So it became a little bit more efficient. And then, from my point of view, one of the really nice features of having the individual components, I was able to sort of start creating 3D, because obviously traditionally on the 64, your sprites are either in front or behind the background. You can't have a situation whereby they are both in front and behind. So we had to actually come up with a way of cutting out the foreground from the actual sprite to give the idea that if he walks behind a bush or he walks behind a pole, he disappears. Obviously, all of that stuff, that was the starting point before we then started sort of putting the screens together. Because, I mean, at the end of the day, it was a wonderful. What impressed me when I started the project was that I came down and Hugh had spent so much time creating all these beautiful screens. He'd created all of these animations in, I think it was Steve Beat's sprite editor. So they were all sequences of ninjas fighting with lots and lots of different variety of weapons. Far too many for the game. So actually that was one of the first tasks. We actually had to go through it and actually cut out this graphic and that graphic because we just didn't have the memory for it, which for me, that was really quite a wonderful opportunity to be given too much graphics, too many graphics, and be able to sort of pick and choose the ones that work together. So that was sort of those were the issues that happened at the very start of the project.
If you want to be part of preserving these iconic 7 retro games from the Last Ninja series, International Karate, IK Plus, and Bangkok Nights by bringing them to PlayStation 4 and 5, Nintendo Switch, Xbox and PC, then please do check out the campaign, where every tier includes having you, the fan, having your name added to this compilation. The Last Ninja Collection lets you relive these iconic retro classic games just as you remember them, with the option to choose the system you grew up with, whether it's the C64, Amiga or Spectrum. Plus, for those back in the Diamond tier level, you gain access to demos of unreleased games like The Last Ninja 4 and International Karate ++. These are titles that never made it to the market and were abandoned. We're also including copies of the original concept designs, storyboards, and even redacted contracts and correspondence with former partners like EA, Activision, Philips Interactive, Simon & Schuster, and many more. This gives you, the fans, the full history and contributes to the preservation of these iconic retro games as part of video game preservation. These games mean the world to me and the rest of the team at System 3, who just simply couldn't be happier to finally bring them to you via this very limited Kickstarter release. So please do share this update to help make this collection a reality. Also keep an eye out for more updates, as we have plenty of never before seen or heard behind the scenes information. We plan to release these before the campaign is through. This exclusive, one-of-a-kind limited edition pack is available only on Kickstarter. You can find the link in the description below. Don't miss out. So from everyone here at System 3, thank you for your support.